What is up, Tube users, and welcome back to another episode of Overwatch 2 Heroes, an in-depth guide. Today, we are talking about the newest support hero just recently added to the game, Illari. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Illari's primary fire for her solar rifle is a hit scan weapon that deals 75 to 22.5 damage at max charge depending on the range. At a minimum charge, this weapon deals 25 to 7.5 damage per shot. The damage fall off for this gun is pretty large, starting at 30 meters and working its way to its minimum at 50 meters. Ideally, you want to be shooting this weapon when it's at its max charge, which takes 1 second to fully charge after shooting. A couple things to note about the primary fire is it deals only 1.5 times damage for headshot instead of the normal 2 times. Another thing to note is the charge timer will pause when reloading and when using her secondary fire. Speaking of, Illari's secondary fire is a healing beam that heals the target for 120 HP per second. This secondary fire can only be used for 3 consecutive seconds before having to recharge. If used fully, it does take longer to recharge at 3.36 seconds. Also, if used fully, it cannot be used again until fully recharged. Unlike her primary fire, however, using her primary fire will continue to recharge her secondary fire. The range of the healing beam is about 20 meters. Now, let's move on to her first ability. Illari's first ability is Outburst, which launches her in the direction she's facing if no movement inputs are made. If you are moving, however, while using this ability, she will go in the direction of the movement. This ability also deals 10 damage to any enemies within 8.5 meter radius, plus knocks them back slightly. Using this ability while jumping will allow Illari to get more vertical. However, it does not go as high as you think and can be tricky to travel to a vertical surface. With her first ability now out of the way, let's dive into her next ability. Illari's second ability is Healing Pylon. This is a turret-like pylon that is thrown in a similar arc to Baptista's Immortality Field. This pylon can stick to most surfaces when thrown. When deployed, this pylon has 75 normal HP and 75 shield. When deployed, it will heal allies within its range for 40 HP every 1.25 seconds. The healing is prioritized by the hero with the lowest health percentage in its range. The range for the pylon is between 5 to 10 meters. I couldn't figure out what it was exactly, unfortunately. Its normal cooldown is 8 seconds, but if destroyed, the cooldown goes up to 12 seconds. The cooldown starts immediately once the pylon is activated, and does not go up unless it is destroyed. Only one pylon can be active at a time. Now that we've gone over the abilities, let's move on to Illari's ultimate ability. Illari's ultimate ability is Captive Sun. This ability allows Illari to fly for about 5 seconds, during which she can shoot a massive ball of solar energy. This solar energy deals 5 damage on direct hit, 50 splash damage, and 120 damage upon its explosion. The explosion radius is about 8 meters. Any enemies hit directly or by the splash damage are slowed for 7 seconds and are marked by the Captive Sun. During this time, if a marked enemy receives 90 damage from any source, they will explode, dealing 120 damage. The direct hit and splash damage do not count towards the 90 damage needed to explode. The mark can be removed by a multitude of different abilities that we'll get into. However, if the mark is already triggered, the explosion will happen regardless. Now that we've gone over Illari's kit, let's get into some heroes that counter and are countered by Illari. Keep in mind that this hero is brand new, so take these counters with a grain of salt, because they are just an opinion based on what I've encountered so far playing her. Her kit feels somewhat similar to Ana's, except for with better movement and substantial burst healing. With that in mind, I think she fares well against a tank like Roadhog. With her ability to do a good amount of damage at range and her outburst allowing her to get away from Roadhog's chain hook, this tank matchup is good for Illari. As for a DPS, I've seen Illari perform well against flying heroes like Pharah. While not a hard counter for sure, the high damage at hit scan accuracy of Illari's primary fire, plus her ability to sustain herself with her healing pylon, this matchup is pretty good for Illari. In the support category, I would say Illari fares well against an enemy Moira. Again, because of her long range damage, plus her ability to sustain better than Moira, this matchup bodes well for Illari. Now, let's look at the other side of things and talk about heroes that counter Illari. Similar to Ana, who has a better time against enemies from afar but struggles up close, any enemy that can close the gap on Illari is going to have an easier time. As for a tank that can do that, I'm going to go with Doomfist. With his versatile movement and his ability to knock back Illari away from her healing pylon, this matchup can be a tough one for Illari. Another DPS that Illari struggles against is Sombra. Sombra has an easy time getting to enemy backlines with her stealth, plus her hack can temporarily disable Illari's healing pylon, so this matchup does not favor Illari. And finally, a support hero that does well against an enemy Illari is Lucio. With his speed boost helping his teammates close the gap on enemies, and his maneuverability making him a tough target to hit, this matchup does not bode well for Illari. Now that we've gone over counters, let's dive into some tips and tricks for Illari. My first tip is about her healing pylon, which can be used on just about any surface, even vertical ones or upside down surfaces. It can also be used on the payload. However, on push maps, it cannot be used on the robot, but can instead be used on the wall that the robot pushes. My next tip is about her ultimate ability. It technically counts as a channeled ability through the entirety of the captive sun. So if she's stunned or hacked or any sort of disablement, she will lose that captive sun triggered effect. Another good tip is to always use your jump ability before using outburst. That way you get a little bit more verticality and a little bit more speed when using outburst. As for her primary and secondary fire, the key is to manage your primary and secondary fire. You want to be always using your primary at max charge if you can, unless an enemy is super low. And you never want to have your secondary fire be at minimum charge, because then it takes the full 3.36 seconds to fully recharge, and that can be a real pain and a real struggle if you need to heal an ally quickly. Another tip about Illari's healing pylon is you want to place it in awkward and far away positions as you can. It does have a long range, so putting it further away shouldn't really matter too much, and you want to do this so that enemies have a tougher time destroying it or have to look away from you while they are destroying it. Another key point about using Illari's ultimate is you definitely want to have some communication with your team when you're going to use the ultimate, because you have to do the 90 damage to get that 120 burst. You want to have your teammates be able to follow up, because Illari may be able to follow up on one person, but multiple people, it's kind of tough for Illari just to do it by herself. There's also a lot of things that counter Illari's ultimate ability. Since the initial shot is a projectile, it can be deflected by Genji's deflect, it can be absorbed by D.Va's defense matrix. There's a lot of different things that it can just be absorbed from. And plus, once they have the Captive Sun mark on them, it can be cleansed by Kiriko's Cleanse. It can be cleansed by Zarya's Shield Bubble. So there's a lot of tough things that make it difficult to actually get her ultimate off. But when you do get it off, it does a substantial amount of damage. But other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to leave any more tips and tricks you have for Illari in the comments below. And I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.
That rhythm. That rhythm.